Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, April 26th. We are back from Easter break. Hitting the radar, we'll start with the historic fines and action being taken against Meta and Apple in the European Union for privacy violations. We'll shift to the privacy and access to information stories from across Canada, including great reminders about U.S. border search and seizures by U.S. border agents. That will lead us to our now regular look south of the border and internationally, and we'll wrap with a clip from our upcoming commentary between FIPA President Mike Larsen, Executive Director Jason Woywada, and Legal Researcher Spencer Izen, taking a look at Canada's federal election, discussing FIPA surveys, questionnaires, and guides. Let's dive in. The European Union has delivered historic penalties under its new Digital Markets Act, hitting Apple with a €500 million fine for anti-competitive practices involving app developers, and Meta with a €200 million fine for privacy violations tied to their targeted advertising model, as well as monopolizing. Both companies must comply within 60 days or face escalating fines. Concurrently, Meta faces a landmark U.S. antitrust trial that could force it to break off Instagram and WhatsApp due to concerns over market dominance. All of this while Meta intends to resume training its AI models using publicly available European user content, prompting fresh privacy scrutiny and concerns. The posts being used would be public posts made by adults in the 27-nation European Union. Meta said it will start notifying users in the EU about the training and will include a link to a form where they can object at any time. In Canada, transparency concerns and privacy breaches continue to make headlines. Let's take a look moving east to west. From Pratik Bhattarai, LGI reporter at the Eastern Graphic. Prince Edward Island's Housing Task Force faces criticism for extreme secrecy after Freedom of Information requests revealed heavily redacted meeting minutes, making it impossible to access any real progress on housing initiatives. April Gallant, communications officer for the Department of Housing, said the information was protected under FOIPP. She also said a report is expected to come out this spring that would contain more on what has been achieved. In Ontario, from Philip Blancher, LGI reporter at the Morrisburg Leader. The Upper Canada School District Board is grappling with the aftermath of a significant cyber attack. The breach in January forced the board into manual operations, causing extensive disruptions and creating a $3 million budget deficit. The expenses included the immediate response to the January 5th incident, consulting fees, restoring services, and adding further security measures. The school board's internet services were shut down for several weeks following the cyber attack. The attack on the UCDSB happened around the same time as many school boards across Canada and the United States were hit with a breach at software provider PowerSchool. The UCDSB is a customer of PowerSchool, but the attack is not related to that company's data breach. Moving to the prairies, Saskatchewan's Health Minister Jeremy Cockerill dismissed allegations of newborns being transferred to the U.S. for medical care amid neonatal intensive care unit, or NICU, staffing shortages. However, the Saskatchewan Union of Nurses President Tracy Zambury told Global News that the staffing shortages has led to families being sent to North Dakota, but did not offer specifics. Despite official denials, transparency concerns remain high due to ongoing FOI delays and incomplete answers. Cockerill said he has not spoken with Zambury, but plans to reach out to see if he's unaware of a specific case. The Alberta Health Services scandal continues to undermine confidence in the Danielle Smith government and highlight the lengths it will go to keep its secrets. Alberta has won the right to question its fired health authority CEO about confidential emails leaked to the media, raising important questions about whistleblower protections and transparency in government procurement. The former CEO is suing the government and AHS for wrongful dismissal, alleging she was illegally fired to stop her from investigating sweetheart deals and political interference in multi-million-dollar health procurement contracts. AHS claims she was fired for poor job performance and for stalling mandated health reform. An injunction application last month came after health authority officials discovered that the former CEO forwarded nearly a dozen emails containing confidential information related to allegations she had made to a personal email address the day before she was fired. Moving to the West Coast, a Vancouver police whistleblower has alleged that officers were pressured to meet arrest quotas during a crackdown in the downtown East Side, prompting BC's police oversight body to demand a formal investigation into the serious allegations. The whistleblower complaint was accompanied by a corresponding letter from the Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner asking the board to take action at a recent meeting. Much of the email from the whistleblower was redacted, but one sentence reads that they were taught that officers could decide whether to charge people. A statement from a police spokesperson doesn't directly answer whether quotas are being used. However, they did say the police are unapologetic about the work they are doing in the downtown East Side, and the results of Task Force Barrage speak for themselves. Finally, the British Columbia Court of Appeal has upheld a landmark ruling against ICBC, maintaining $15,000 per person damages for victims whose personal data was illegally accessed and leaked by an employee, leading to violent targeted attacks. The company argued that the privacy breaches at issue only warranted nominal damages of $500 each. The lawsuit stemmed from a former employee named who accessed customer license plate information and sold it to criminals who used it to carry out arson and shooting attacks on homes and vehicles owned by 13 people. We wrap this segment with a couple of stories that are important to keep in mind with summer travel fast approaching. Brian Lockhart, LGI reporter at the New Tecumseh Times, reminds us that if you're planning travel across Canada, be sure to remember your health card, as it ensures access to essential medical services in other provinces. But be cautious, as the patchwork approach across the country means differences. Coverage for ambulance services, prescriptions, and private care do vary from province to province. Plus, Canada's reporting on rights when entering the U.S. has hit international attention through the Associated Press. The story reminds us that when traveling to the U.S., be aware that border agents have broad authority to search your digital devices without warrants. The Canadian government has warned travelers in a recent travel advisory that U.S. border agents are entitled to search your electronic devices and, quote, don't need to provide a reason when requesting a password to open your device, end quote. There is lots of advice that the best way to protect yourself is by disabling biometrics, using encryption, and possibly carrying a dedicated travel device. In the US, Trump-era policies continue to affect data privacy significantly. The controversial Schedule F policy has been revived, potentially reclassifying thousands of federal employees as at-will workers, enabling easier removal based on political alignment, a move criticized for undermining public sector accountability. Once the rule is finalized, the president plans to sign another executive order to conclude the process. Meanwhile, a federal judge has blocked Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, from unrestricted access to Social Security Administration data, citing severe privacy risks. The injunction does allow DOGE staffers to access data that has been redacted or stripped of anything personally identifiable if they undergo training and background checks. DOGE and any DOGE-affiliated staffers must also purge any of the non-anonymized Social Security data that they have received since January 20th. Additionally, disturbing revelations surfaced as over 6,000 immigrants were falsely recorded as deceased by the Social Security Administration. This was done after the Department of Homeland Security identified them as temporarily paroled aliens on the terrorist watch list or with FBI criminal records. Critics have denounced this tactic, labeling it digital murder, intending to pressure immigrants into leaving the country. The move will make it much harder for affected immigrants to use banks or other basic services where Social Security numbers are required. That's not the only news out of the United States that intersects privacy and transparency. Two Seattle police officers who attended the January 6th rally at the Capitol have petitioned the Supreme Court to protect their identities from public disclosure, arguing potential harm outweighs public transparency interests. The officers claim they are protected under the state's public records law. They say they did nothing wrong and that revealing their names would violate their privacy. After January 6th, the Seattle Police Department ordered an investigation into whether any of its officers who traveled to Washington, D.C. to attend the rally had violated any laws or department policies, resulting in 2 officers being fired. Oregon's Driver and Motor Vehicle Branch mistakenly registered approximately 1,700 non-citizens to vote over the past decade due to software errors, sparking renewed debates about the security of automatic voter registration systems. Nearly all the newfound errors involved people whose information was entered into a previous computer system that was in place between 2010 and 2020. Most of the clerical errors stemmed from a drop-down menu option in the DMV's computer system that staff use when entering personal information, according to authorities. And a judge dismissed a major transparency lawsuit against the Mormon Church regarding the management of its massive $100 billion investment portfolio, leaving many questions unanswered about the church's financial transparency. The lawsuit was directed at business and investment entities under the church, which doesn't publicly disclose details about its finances. Attorneys for the plaintiffs wanted an independent entity to oversee donated funds. The judge said a 3-year statute of limitations on fraud claims in Utah passed before the lawsuit was filed in October 2023, and said the plaintiffs failed to adequately show how any fraud had occurred. Before we move to the Canadian federal election, there's a new national-level data breach that has come to light. Morocco is dealing with the fallout of an unprecedented cyber attack allegedly originating from Algeria. Hackers leaked extensive salary and pension data of millions of citizens onto the messaging app Telegram, exacerbating existing geopolitical tensions reflecting vast inequalities and posing substantial risks to individuals whose sensitive personal and financial information was exposed. Moroccan media has attributed the attack to Algerian hackers, describing it as an episode in a larger cyber war between the two countries. As Canada approaches the April 28th federal election, access and privacy remain pivotal issues. In brief, FIPA's Election Hub provides a variety of information about questions and candidates' positions on privacy, transparency, and access to information. FIPA's Fast Facts Voter Guide offers critical questions for voters to engage candidates on transparency, privacy, and data management issues. The Green Party has extensively responded to FIPA's Leaders Questionnaire and the Candidate Survey. They've committed to significant privacy access and information reforms, including extending privacy laws to political parties, introducing mandatory breach notifications, and ensuring robust enforcement powers for independent offices. I sat down to discuss the resources, responses, and this election with FIPA President Mike Larsen, Executive Director Jason Woywada, and researcher Spencer Izen. We'll be putting that commentary online shortly. In the meantime, here's an excerpt.
Well, I want to hear from Spencer on this one to start. We got the green response. Spencer, what did you see in that green response? Because when I looked at it, it seemed to have a lot of emphasis on information management.
The green response to me indicated that they were very attentive to the conversation, which I think we can especially appreciate when this isn't necessarily an election-winning issue, as much as we might perhaps like it to be, and I certainly would. But things like mentioning that the Information and Privacy Commissioners need to have the ability to compel records. They need to be able to review records, particularly instances of cabinet confidence. Officers who are administering the Access to Information Act federally need some form of statutory independence. These are all things that people have been asking for a very long time. So on one hand, yes, we might see this if you're in the information and privacy world, you might perceive this as more of the same. But I would counter that to say, one, they're the only party saying anything. And two, they did approach this with a lot more particularity than we typically get from these type of questionnaires. There were multiple paragraphs dedicated to rather specific issues related to record keeping, related to proactive disclosure. And yes, there's more details to hash out there for sure. As Jason, you'll certainly know, I'm not necessarily a fan of aimless proactive disclosure. I would like to see proactive disclosure with an end attached to it. I would. It's not necessarily for an end to itself. And it is part of a larger participatory regime that we need to work towards, and making access to information more generally an experience and an interactive part of being an informed citizen. So there's work to be done there, but I think that what stands out to me with the Green platform is that they are attentive to the conversation, and the party, frankly, is I think quite useful from a civil liberties perspective, particularly in British Columbia as well as federally, to have in the legislature. They're a pretty consistent voice that the civil liberties community can rely on to communicate these things. So I think, to me, the platform indicates that this is the party that particularly access to information advocates need to be looking to kind of put pressure on whoever forms governments to advance these issues, because they know the conversation super well. And even if they don't have a lot of the particularized ideas set up, they're able to participate from a place of alertness, which is, I think, more than we can say for everyone else in the campaign.
I think it's important to highlight, we are a nonpartisan organization, and we're not advocating how people vote one way or another in any of this. There's lots in that Green response I saw as well. Like when they talked about the fees, they talked about getting rid of additional fees and maintaining the application fee. There's lots of things you can quibble with in their response as well, from an access and privacy side as well, when you dive into it. But that said, they at least made that distinction, and it was an interesting distinction for them to make, and it was valuable to have that discussion. And so that's, I think, what I appreciated in their response, was they weren't scared to sort of go into some of those details in greater depth than we've seen, in terms of just saying, "Oh, we want to have greater transparency on the part of government." So that was good to see.
Yeah, and they link access to information to this broader ecology of transparency. That's the term from a American law professor, the name of Seth Krimer, wrote about it in 2008 and again a few years later. But it's all about expanding what we conceive the mechanisms of transparency to exist of. FOIA in the United States, for example, isn't the only way to achieve a check and balance in government, and it's not necessarily the one mechanism to do it. It's part of a system to do it. And what was really interesting about the Greens' response is that they mentioned rather proactively, in response to, I think it was the record-keeping question that we had asked, that they'd create a centralized portal for policy evidence. Now, regardless of the issues that of implementing that might arise regarding civil service policy advice, it's still, to me, that idea recognizes that it's not just government emails that actually matter to people, or briefing notes that actually matter, but it's how those things come together and actually result on the inside on advice being delivered up to the people with who we elected, or senior civil servants. So to me, even making that linkage in a participatory sense is really important, and is a step ahead of, I think, where most transparency conversations have kind of got stuck in the past. And I think moving forward, particularly in 2025, when we're seeing the global erosion of democratic institutions, the really small things like this that expand the scope of what we want, freedom of information and privacy to do, and what ends we want them to serve. This is all really important stuff. So I was actually really glad to see that.
Yeah,
I agree. And I mean, in addition to being the only substantial response, and Spencer, as you noted, it's actually pretty detailed as a response, in some ways a wish list of some issues that the advocacy community has been pushing at for a long time. I think that the Green response suggests that there's a departure from the norms when it comes to the status quo of transparency. For example, it's been a fight for so many years to try and increase the capacity of Canadians to know about the decisions of cabinet, the Prime Minister's office, to have robust public interest disclosure principles embedded in our laws, and the Greens have just come out and said, well, we want to move forward on all of those different things, so we can't compare this to the responses of the other parties because they haven't issued responses, but we can look to what they've done, both in opposition and in power, and there has been a maintenance of the status quo on these issues that has, I think, created a set of expectations around the kind of information that Canadians can have access to that's really impoverished, right? The status quo has these gaps in it that just haven't been addressed. It's been seen as intractable for so long. We've been used to kind of quibbling around the edges. And so just to have this as part of the conversation, right, it shifts that window and presents, I think, some interesting opportunities. So exciting to see.
As we wrap up this show, please remember that Monday, April 28th, 2025 is Federal Election Day. If you haven't already voted in advance polls or special ballot, be sure to get to a polling station to have your voice heard. As always, we hope today's stories help you stay informed about the latest issues surrounding privacy, information management, and public transparency. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe to FIPA News Monitoring or consider a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music in today's show is composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big FIPA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and outlets that make this podcast possible, and to you, our listeners, who help make this successful. Stay safe and stay informed.